Hey, everybody, we're talking about Trump and tech, and then we're going to jump into some good old fashioned continuous delivery in the land of DevOps before we take a look at these latest servers from Dell. You're watching Techstrong Gang. Hello, everybody. We're back and we're joined today by Camberly Bates, who is still, I hope, in Colorado, correct? All right. Camberly is a chief technology advisor still for the Futurum Group and specializes in cloud infrastructure and all kinds of good stuff. And, is enjoying that status where you're kind of somewhere in between.
Yes, and it's, kind of official. I'm, exiting out at the end of this month, more or less. But I've told Alan and team I would love to continue playing with the Techstrong Gang because I find I learn so much when I get on this thing.
All right. Uh, we would love to have you, but is this like exiting, like, the Rolling Stones have a concert every 3 years and say this is the last one and then they keep coming back?
I don't know. We'll see how the body, you look at those guys and they're still kicking on the stages. So I'm going to see how long my legs last on the ski slopes and the bike and the hiking and the backpacking and all that kind of
And,
stuff.
and, and then you'll say, I miss those idiots and I should call them.
Exactly.
All right. Also joining us today is Robert Reeves, who I believe is still in Texas. Is that correct?
That's right, Austin, Texas. We are all here because we're not all there.
All right. I like that. And I am once again in the west of Ireland. So, thanks to the wonders of modern technology, we can do this almost anywhere in the world. And we're trying to prove it now. Let's jump in here. We only have the three of us. So, I'm going to kick off the A block myself directly. And we're talking about what's going on with Trump and his relationship with the tech community. Because initially, they came down to Mar-a-Lago. They all bent the knee. They all left little gifts. And people are wondering, well, was that worth the time and effort? Earlier this week, it was reported that Elon Musk is screaming or yelling at our trade representatives for being quote unquote idiots because they are imposing these tariffs. He's apparently the other president isn't listening to Elon on this one. So perhaps Elon doesn't have the clout, or maybe he served his purpose and they're moving on. Who knows? But as I kind of look at this whole situation, you got to wonder, like, is everybody starting to figure out, well, who's taking the biggest hits? It seems like Apple is getting trounced because they have more to lose from a manufacturing standpoint involving goods from China. Maybe Amazon is not as sensitive to some of this stuff, even though they sell everything under the planet here. But perhaps they will just get different suppliers for different things and they might have a little more leeway. But as I look at this whole thing, it just seems like there's no amount of money that's going to make a difference one way or the other. So maybe everybody will just go back to their own knitting and stop paying attention. Robert, I know you're down in Texas, but what's your take on what's happening here with the relationship between Trump and the tech community writ large?
Well, I am just so pleased to be a part of, is it four now, once in a lifetime economic seismic shifts? I'm just so excited, with .com, Great Recession, now this. Look, it is, at the end of the day, business thrives on certainty. Business leaders need to know what to expect as they plan, and lacking that certainty, they're going to pull back. And bottom line is that we're already starting to see that with companies freezing hiring, freezing investments, and people are going to start making decisions, based on their best interests. Right now, because they don't have the information they need to make investments, they're not going to make investments. They can't predict the future and they don't have a reasonable expectation of what's to come. So they're going to act like it. And so expect more bloodletting and gnashing of teeth and hand wringing until we get to something more stable.
Mm-hmm. It also seems like it may get worse for the big tech companies in this sense. As I look through the tariffs, right, they're measuring goods and not including services. And in Europe, where I happen to be at the moment, they do have some, modest taxes on services and digital services from US companies. But, there's a debate happening here about how to ratchet that up or whether we should ratchet it up on their side. But they are trying to figure out, should they just be, wait them out a little bit and have a conversation and hope that everything kind of evens out soon? Or, is big tech going to get hit harder because suddenly a lot of Europeans are going to turn off services that they currently get as part of this whole trade war? And maybe they already are because they're just generally pissed. But Kimberly, um, is there a moment for de-escalation here?
Have no clue. I'm just going to give you my straight out going, like saying, okay, so we can see the guys in Vietnam and that kind of stuff starting to kind of go to zero or whatever the numbers they're negotiating right now. So they start getting through that. We see maybe we weren't as bad yesterday. I mean, it's like every day is a new day. Is kind of like where this is going and what's occurring. So, I mean, you're right, absolutely right, Robert. You can't make a decision on investments right now. And if I was running a CEO with a very large capex kind of thing, and I'm not, Harvard and I'm not, San Antonio and those kind of guys, I'd be kind of like waiting to see how things were going to weigh out. And the other thing we talked about, and I mentioned last time I was on, is that some of these guys had already anticipated this happening. So there was some pre-buy that was going um, on some of the technology to saying, okay, so do we pre-buy? Do we not pre-buy? How do we anticipate going into this? So we don't have that long-term piece. Then there's the big, big question on this. Is this actually will cause people to create new manufacturing facilities in the United States? And that is the biggest difficult one because on long-term decisions, big CapEx decisions, heck, Trump will be out in 4 years. Maybe JD Vance will be back, and I have no clue. But in 2 years, we're doing re-elections, and does that stop everything? So what happens? And you're absolutely right. We're in this unpredictable space to say. So I think there's a couple things here. As one is that the administration is going to go through some of these negotiations in a few weeks. We'll be kind of know where we're at to a certain extent on most of these, big countries on those levels and what's going to be taxed or tariffed, what's not going to be tariff taxed. Um, and then kind of start making some decisions. I think we are going to see a pullback, though. I mean, I know myself personally going, okay, so do I go spend this money on this or not? I don't know.
I think it's only a matter of time unless cooler heads prevail before somebody rings up Amazon and says, all the services that you're providing in the United States, you need to be certain they're all hosted somewhere in the United States. And you might see the Europeans do the same thing. They're already kind of moving down that path, but they may say that none of these services can be delivered from the US or anywhere else besides our own local data center. And China might do the same thing, which um, Robert, walk me through this a little bit, but we invented this thing called the cloud to get away from having to put things in specific places, and it looks like we're going to legislate our way back to that.
Well, remember the cloud is just somebody else's server. So it's just, it's fractional purchasing. That's what you're doing. I will say this, what I have seen with my experiences with the Linux Foundation and CNCF is that there is a huge appetite for two things in Europe when it comes to technology. One is open source tech. Companies and governments there want to make certain that they're building their solutions on open source because that is effectively an open standard. And they don't want to get locked in, just like any other company across the world. Vendor lock-in is a real problem, is a risk. But the other thing is that they want to have that data is stored locally so that they can manage it, that personal data, and also have control of it. Luckily, this is an opportunity for European cloud providers to grow and scale. If you are offering services based on open standards on open source, that's a far quicker time to market. And it's easier to, not easy, but easier to deliver these services based on Kubernetes or some kind of observability solution around open telemetry. And so you're going to start seeing, I believe, the growth of EU-based cloud providers. We're already seeing that in China with our friends at Alibaba and Tencent and Huawei and many, many others. And so you're going to see these same services. It's not going to be proprietary things like what Amazon has offered with Lambda and Fargate and those sorts of things. You're going to start saying, well, we just have a Kubernetes service and it's good enough.
Do you think we might see a moment, and it would be historic, where folks from Wall Street and the big tech companies all get together and pay a visit to the president and say,
well, didn't they already?
I know, but now post tariffs, they need to come around and say, this isn't working out the way you think it is, and we're wiping out trillions of dollars worth of valuation. At least,
well, I'm sure that's a very reasonable approach, and I'm sure they're all working on that. And but like I said, they've already done this. There is, if anybody is surprised by this, they weren't paying attention in November. And these things were telegraphed. Hey, for Christmas, we had an electronics Christmas. Immediately after the election, made sure to get the, PS5 Pro, 4K TV, all the goodies, because those things were going up. And it's just, if there is nothing that big tech can do to change this administration's mind. They have done everything, showing up at the inauguration, doing what they were doing. It did not work for them. They have learned a valuable lesson, and they're going to react accordingly. The next step for them is hunker down and wait and see.
I also can't help but wonder if big tech doesn't have the revenue streams that it might have had in the past. Will little tech benefit, and will we see smaller companies able to compete more aggressively with those people providing those types of digital services, or is that war already over?
Oh, there's always room for startups. Always.
Yes, always, because there's always room for innovation. I mean, they're going to create a moat on their strategy. The innovation are the guys that they end up buying to add into their overall technology capabilities. So I think there's always room for that. And I kind of talked about we had this kind of anxious discussion around energy consumption and AI, and it's going to take over everything in the world. And like 2 months ago or a month and a half ago, Mike and I remember on here talking about that and saying, you know what, we're just going to see innovation around energy consumption. We're going to see innovation around air cooling. We're going to see innovation on all those areas, because when there is a need, somebody shows up and says, let's go take a look and see how we can do this better. And it's one of the beautiful things about, our country is that is what we do. And enabling that to happen, and not putting on rules and regs that stop that kind of innovation from happening. So I'm, you kind of look at saying, okay, so, let's see where this goes. We've been through really bad times before, and I don't see this one as bad as others that we've been through. 2008 was crazy. The dot-com bust was nuts. This one feels different for some reason. Maybe I'm just, Pollyanna. I'm not looking at the sky falling. Maybe that's just my attitude right now.
Well, Kimberly, I agree with you completely. This can be handled. This problem can be solved with a single tweet. And this is not structural, like what we saw in 2008 with all of those subprime loans bundled up into prime bonds and those sorts of things, toxic assets. It's not like really at the end of the day, it wasn't. If we look at .com, it wasn't the .com bust. It wasn't really outside of the impact of 9/11 had on the stock market shutting down. That was, just limited to technology. Certainly felt like the end of the world to me because I was in the middle of it. But I agree with you. These things can be solved. It's from my perspective, it just seems like very much a negotiation tactic. And it will get resolved at some point soon. And then we'll all breathe a sigh of relief and it'll be okay. But companies, until that happen, are not going to invest. So if you are looking for a new opportunity, if you are seeking to invest somewhere, it's going to be pretty rough.
Mm. I will tell you what feels different, and I've been on the other side of the pond since this thing started, but at least from here, I'm not seeing a lot of people expressing a whole lot of sympathy for Amazon, Netflix, Apple. There's not this sense of uh, outrage that these poor companies are being treated roughly by the president. So maybe, Kimberly, that's what feels different.
I laugh because I received the headlines, with the picture of the guy standing beside Trump at the inauguration and that kind of stuff. They'd all flown, kissed the ring, dropped the multi-million dollars into his inauguration, and now they're like getting jilted at the altar or jilted at the prom or something like that. Um, One of the things that was stated by, I can't remember who it was, if it was Scott Bessner or if it was Howard Lutnick, talking about the market right now, and the people that have been hit the hardest is the Magnificent Seven. And I was trying to pull up those numbers after I saw the topic for today, and it's bigger than your 22% that you're quoting. The Magnificent Seven have gone down much more than they have. And that may be just a pure reflection of guys, they were overvalued. I mean, the last year, we have had this AI craze. We couldn't have a meeting without talking about AI. It was disgusting, frankly. And yet we're believing that, yes, it's going to have a fundamental change. But it just seemed that the hype that was on NVIDIA and some of the others and some of the numbers that are getting quoted by, the forecasters, et cetera, just seemed like .com all over again. And so then there's a piece of me that's saying, as I look at some of these things happen, it's like, well, maybe what we're really, yes, if you really look at the portfolios and that kind of thing, maybe it's really like back where we were a year ago, right? And the numbers were really, really good a year ago, even as we looked at the market. So it's not like that we're back in 10 years ago where the numbers were, in terms of the investments and that sort of thing. So that's kind of how I look at that. And how that's why I think we don't have that much sympathy for Zuck and Bezos so you lost a few billion. Sorry.
Will someone think of the billionaires? Will someone please think of those poor, poor billionaires?
All right, folks, we're going to move on to our next subject, but I would say those poor tech billionaires, they're probably looking for a refund right now, and we'll have as much success as you did trying to get a refund from them. We'll be back.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Hey, folks, we're back, and we're going to be talking about a thing called Argo, which is an open source continuous delivery platform originally built by Intuit and given to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And we talk a lot about how AI is transforming software development, but I would posit the following theory that Argo may have a more profound impact on the way we build and deploy software, because it's changing the construct between what we call continuous integration and continuous delivery. Today, if you look at a CI/CD environment, the CD part is a lot of extensions of CI scripts, and they don't always work so well, and they don't scale, and they're pretty brittle. But other than that, it's always great. Argo is arguing it's time to loosely couple CI and CD with a more graphical tool that maybe appeals more to platform engineering types, or maybe even, heavens to Betsy, IT operations folks. Robert, I know you're close to this topic, and Argo is like the number 5 most used thing after Kubernetes these days in the CNCF landscape. From your perspective, what's going on here?
Well, it is, I do. Isn't it wonderful that you have a company like Intuit that has donated an open source project and it has taken off like this? Like typically, let's look back at where Kubernetes came from. That was from Google. They donated that. That started Cloud Native Computing Foundation, those sorts of things. We typically think about these large open source projects coming from technology companies, and Intuit very much is a technology company. But their business model has nothing to do with selling CD tools or cloud or something like that. They viewed that as non-differentiating technology and donated that to the CNCF because they wanted a superior continuous delivery solution. They built Argo for themselves, thought others might find interest in it, donated that to the CNCF, and it took off. And now it's not Intuit that's just driving innovation with Argo. It is that entire community and other companies that are part of it. People proudly wear Argo CD t-shirts, which tells me that it is one, the hearts and minds, whether it's DevOps, developers, SREs. And so whether there's a push-pull between CI and CD, yes, of course there is. Of course, like where is that line? But what it's telling me is that one, people are very happy with Argo and they're using more and more of it. And two, they're building more apps on Kubernetes. So it's telling me that Kubernetes is won. And not only has this model of dominating and open sourcing non-differentiated technology wins, but also that as a platform, for better or worse, Kubernetes is where it's at.
Let me go back to there's another end user company that donated a project that seems to be getting traction, and it's Backstage from Spotify, right?
Yes, it's another great example.
Right. And interestingly enough, do you think that IT organizations may prefer something built by another IT organization rather than a vendor because the IT organization understands their pain? When I was talking to the folks working on the Argo project, they were saying, it's taken them a while to understand the needs of other companies, and they've completely rewritten the underlying platform to kind of make that adjustment. But is there something to be said for getting something from somebody who's lived your pain?
Well, yes. We buy products from companies, and remember, using open source is a purchase decision. You might not be paying with money, but you're certainly paying with time and energy. And so you want to purchase a product, you want to use a product where it's going to solve your problems, and not just the problems you have today, but the problems you're going to have tomorrow. And companies are looking at others like Spotify and Intuit. These are highly respected companies, and for them to release open source, this is how we did it. Other companies, maybe banking companies, are paying attention. Banks are paying attention to this and saying, "Well, we want to be a tech company like Spotify, like Intuit. We don't want to be seen as a bank, and we need to start acting like it." But I'm reminded of what Kelsey Hightower said at a executive summit at KubeCon in Chicago. And he was pointing out to executives that were just learning about open source and cloud native technology there, that if you want to win at open source, you hire a maintainer. Have a person that if you're going to bet on Kubernetes or Backstage or Argo, that bring in a maintainer, bring them into your company. Do not put them into a Scrum. Don't assign tickets to them. Their job is to take care of that open source project that you bet your business on. And also they are top tier support in case things go wrong, but also they keep the vendor honest. A lot of these companies are choosing open source, but they're having it provided by other companies or hosted somewhere else at AWS or Azure or GCP, wherever. And so what that does is that allows you to be the master of your own destiny. I believe that companies are realizing that they do not need to rely on the ISV, the CSP, the software provider, the cloud service provider. that they themselves can pick Kubernetes Backstage, Argo. And if they don't like the pricing or the services they're getting from that service provider, they can just move because it's an open standard. So I do believe that there is somewhat like aspirational adoption of Argo to be more like Intuit, but I do think that it just works and they've proven that they're listening.
Kimberly, are people looking closer at the licensing terms for these open source projects? I mean, one of the things that I like about what Robert just said was that there's no set of investors sitting behind Argo or Spotify going, when are we going to get our money back? It's basically, so they're not going to wake up one morning and change the licensing terms out from underneath everybody to kind of, and then, we'll have other groups create forks and we'll fight and it'll just be a mess. Are organizations savvier about looking at those licensing terms and understanding what they're getting involved in and when they pick something that is an open source project?
Well, if you look at what's going on, because a lot of the open source projects that are big open source projects will have a supporting company, like a Red Hat, if you will, that they are hiring to provide support services. And they may not be doing what you're talking about, Robert, which I applaud, is that if you're going to use open source, you need to have a maintainers on your staff and contribute back. You can't just use. So I think that's a well-stated kind of conversation, given what we have struggled with maintaining of systems. So most of them have some sort of, licensing, or they may want to look at some enterprise support. So that's where the licensing comes into play and how that works. Some of those companies are doing very well. The problem with them is from an investor standpoint, they're not seen as much as having IP. Red Hat successfully went that way so that there is more openness, if you will, to somebody that is taking an open source kind of technology, bringing it to market, adding on top of it. But I still see those companies struggling with what they're adding. And a case in point to me is a company called MinIO, which is in the object storage space. And they've been, well on their way, lots of downloads, huge numbers along this crisis. And as they've tried to move into an enterprise scale licensing model that's actually going to produce revenue, they've struggled, but that's normal. I think that's a normal process. So are companies looking at the licensing? Absolutely. Are they looking at the licensing more critically than they do when you look at a VMware kind of thing? I don't think so, because there's more money there in terms of being out there. I think when you're looking at what you're doing with open source, you're looking at how do you staff your organization to support that environment, because a lot of the requirements and the support structure has to come from your team. Unless you've got something like a Red Hat behind you.
I think you hit on one of the flaws in the whole open source thing. It has nothing to do with the maintainers. It has everything to do with the people who are using it. I think somehow or other they figure out that they're going to be able to download this thing and then they run it, but it doesn't occur to them that somebody actually has to support this thing and integrate it and update it. And there's cost involved in that. And then they wind up with this kind of stack of open source software that they don't know how to support. And then they get frustrated and then they go blame the open source people. And I'm like, you know what, Robert, I think that the issue may be looking at those people in the mirror. So,
Well, exactly. It's like, we see this in open source all the time where somebody uses it, builds their whole business on it. There's an issue and they get very upset. They get very upset at the community, the maintainers for not how dare you? And it's like, you know what? If you don't like it, go use something else. And remember, all open source projects start with a developer scratching an itch. That's Eric Raymond, Cathedral in the Bazaar. And whether that's Linus saying, hey, I want an operating system that's free for x86, gang, check it out. Or, it is like Nathan Voxlin at Liquibase saying, I'm tired of dealing with updating databases. It always starts there, and other people take it, see it, they start using it. And, but they're taking a free ride. And if you're really building your business on this, How dare you? How dare you as a manager, as a leader, not look at the risk of that and seek to alleviate that risk by hiring a maintainer, getting a service provider, something like that. It's really, why did you let me do something so stupid? It's well, you did the dumb thing. And if you're going to bet your business on this, you need to have either maintainer or you need to have a company backing you up. But you still need to be using open source because that gives you freedom to avoid vendor lock-in. And there is the right way of doing open source, and there is there's tons of wrong ways of doing it. But I do believe that it is shown to be a superior development model. It creates tons of value, and everybody gets a taste. Everybody benefits from this when we do open source. There's no winner take all when we're talking about open source. Everybody's making plenty of money off of Kubernetes, all the cloud providers. Everybody's fine. But nobody was just clearly the winner at that. And that's okay. We can all get paid a lot. We can all make money off of Kubernetes, whether you're an application developer or an administrator or a cloud service provider or somebody building tools around Kubernetes. There's plenty of money out there. But if you're trying to get a free ride off of open source, you're doing it wrong.
It reminds me. Go ahead. Sorry.
So we're talking about maintainers, and one of the things that would strike me is we hear a lot of people say we're contributing. IBM, how much we contributed, how we contributed, how we contributed. For me, personal looking from the outside in, trying to understand, okay, so how much of that contribution from these companies are maintainers? How much of that is actual new code that you're doing and writing the next? Because it's always fun to write the next step, not to fix the things. And then I'm struck by, we've heard an awful lot from 37 Signals moving their systems off of AWS and on-prem, and they're pure open source. And they talk. We do this with very, very few people. We operate and my next question is like, I'm going to shoot them an email and say, how many maintainers do you have for code? Are you're using all of this? What's your contribution back to? And maybe they're doing a huge amount, and you don't see it. But I think that there could be within CNCF a highlight the good guys and highlight the bad guys. The wall of shame. You use all of us, but you don't maintain. So I think they ought to do a wall of shame personally.
Well, absolutely. And they, I'm former Linux Foundation, CNCF, and they prefer the carrot over the stick.
Understand.
Yeah. And that's their preference. Rest assured, the community knows. The community knows who the free riders are and are well aware of it. And they don't get help. And they, they're choosing to play. The people that do not contribute back to open source are not building goodwill, and that's bad business. And it is this is not a hippie commune. We're all providing to this because we want to have an expectation of a return on it. JPMC is not investing all of these, time, money, and resources into open source because it makes Jamie Dimon feel good. It is not that. It is because it makes money. It makes economic sense, good business planning, eliminating risk. Remember, banks, they buy risk, they sell risk, they manage risk. And if they are investing in open source, if they are contributing upstream and you are not, well, you need to look in that mirror and really question your life choices, not just from a moral and ethical perspective, but also from just a financial perspective.
I am reminded of a golf tournament I got invited to, and it was gratis, so it didn't cost me anything to go. And I wound up getting paired up with this other fellow who I didn't really know. And after the second hole through about the sixth hole, this guy just complained the whole time. The course sucked. The place was a rotten. And after a while, I just looked at him and I said, you should get your money back. I feel the same way. I feel the same way about the open source complainers. If you're complaining about this thing, and maybe you should go ask for your money back. Oh, that's right. You didn't pay any money for it. So, be grateful is what I would think. But what do I know? Folks, we'll be back in a minute. And I'm not sure we're building that open source wall of shame, but it is something I'm thinking about.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hello, everybody. We're back, and we're going to be talking about some good old-fashioned hardware and servers. Dell this week rolled out their next generation servers. They're based on the Intel 6. And one of the things that they started talking about during the press conference that frankly gave me whiplash was their embrace for disaggregated servers. Now, I've been following Dell for a while, and they were kind of at the forefront of this whole hyperconvergence push, and it was all about combining the compute and the storage, but something seemed to happen along the way here. And they were pointing out now that, well, compute and storage now need to scale independently of each other. There's all these different types of applications out there, and some are monoliths and some are microservices, and some people want to run Kubernetes on bare metal alongside virtual machines. And it's just the world was getting a little more complicated is what they were saying. So Camberly, are we kind of walking away from hyperconvergence here? And is that what's happening? Or is this kind of like we're testing something and we'll see how people respond?
I'm not sure if we're walking away from hyperconvergence, but I think we're going back to the 3-tier architecture. I was on the same briefing with you, and I looked at it. They had the old 3-tier architecture, hyperconvergence, disaggregated infrastructure. And I'm looking at this thing, I'm like going, okay, so how is 3-tier different than the disaggregated one? And I didn't bother to spend time with it. I just kind of went on to the announcements because they had so many announcements on the servers and the storage and that kind of thing, as I didn't dive into that. But I'm saying, okay, so maybe they're looking at the future of different kinds of software they're going to manage it. And I think part of that is looking at how do you manage from a disaggregated or environment where I can still upgrade my storage and compute and my networking in a different way separately, but also have some sort of level of management that goes over it. So that might be the direction they're going, because that's what the direction of HCI was. It was that simplicity of sticking all the pieces together. But as we know, that didn't scale as well as we wanted to do. So customers, especially on the larger side, did not go that direction unless it was a single application like BDI or something like that they could install and manage that way. So that's my thought process on it.
Robert, it almost sounded like Camberly said, this is like my dance moves are so old, they're new again, as long as I call it something different.
Yes. It's shocking. It's shocking that a large tech provider would recycle ideas. I don't know what to expect. It's no, but look, it's the market is telling them. I've got a number of friends that work at Dell. One thing I do know about them is that they have a internal move to standardize, simplify, automate.
Mhm.
They are really driving their company forward to kind of get away from the old Dell. They're really working hard to improve their internal processes and how they're fixing things. I think this is honestly a reflection on what they're experiencing internally. And they've gotten very good recently about looking at, well, we're having this challenge. Perhaps other people are having this as well. Maybe hyperconvergence wasn't the right way to go. Maybe we need to have different approaches for different problems. And let's not try to box it in. I think a lot of that though, I mean, Camberly, like it was a function of the EMC acquisition, right? A lot of that push for storage because they had to monetize it. I mean, that's my view.
Yeah, but it was also, I mean, there's two pieces that were big successes. Their VBlock that they did, which is an integrated system that they rolled out with. And then when they brought in VMware, you had their vSAN environment, which essentially became the VxRail, which was highly successful at that time. And then, of course, we saw Nutanix, and then there used to be like 10 others that were in that space of HCI. What we found when we were looking at our clients going in, I mean, I I come from the mid-range way, okay? But you remember the AS400 and the HP 3000, all that kind of stuff? Is like, okay, whiplash. Let's go back to those. That's another whiplash back to. So that's essentially what they were doing, was this integrated system that made it really easy for the smaller firms to bring systems in, drop it in, having not to manage all three pieces of it, et cetera. Okay, thank you very much. But when it came to the big enterprises, they had their environments. They had their bare metal. You had your your 3-tier VMware environment. Kubernetes hadn't shown up yet. And then you had maybe some unique areas where it would really do a good job, because like VDI that came up, we saw a whole lot of that getting deployed at that time. VDI did really bad if you put it on anything else. So it needed to be this standalone run itself. So I brought in and if you saw Nutanix, that is where they really got their play. And that was same with VxRail. Their first big plays were there. And later on, they added a few others when it came to the enterprise. But honestly, you had to look at what was really going on in the enterprise and parse out to say, no, it's not going to take over the world. And that's where we're at now. And the other thing I'll add to that is, as we've gone into this AI space, what we have seen all of the vendors come out with, and if you've got a server, is an integrated system. And that integrated system, which is not an HCI, but it's still an integrated referenced architecture or system, we're rolling that in because putting all those pieces together is difficult. And if the enterprise wants to move fast, this is a way to roll it in and move quickly, get the deployment, get up and going. So maybe what we're going to see is saying, okay, so now that you got the deploying, how do you scale that out? What's your next step? And maybe it is going into this disaggregated kind of environment that they're talking about.
Well, that's what Intel is really pushing, OPIA, their enterprise blueprint for running AI. You know, I certainly appreciate what Intel is doing around that. And I'm hoping that the vendors start pushing that and start pushing a standard instead of pushing, oh, well, this is how you would do AI infrastructure with Dell or whatever large company that is providing servers. I hope they pick a standard. I hope they pick something where they can plug in, a little bit from Dell, a little bit from this other company based on pricing. I hope that's the way it goes because, I still have post-traumatic stress from vendor lock-in. And I just never want to go back.
See, I read this whole thing almost like a victory dance or Kubernetes. And the way I come to that conclusion is that Dell, rather than telling you that you need to get some obscure little random server that they built specifically for that purpose, is saying Kubernetes now runs on their mainstream platform and it is one of their main target workloads. And that this is something that is core to their strategy going forward. And I don't think I've heard that kind of talk out of any of the big server companies before today, where they were basically, Robert, Kubernetes is a sign and it's one.
Well, if I can go ahead. So we saw this moving a couple of years ago. Again, there's the situation of saying you're going to be standing up. You're looking at saying how you're going to stand up this next generation application environment that you're building on. And that was going to be all this new modern applications that we're doing was a Kubernetes base. So the question is whether or not you're going to build it on top of your VM environment because then you have a single management skill, or if you're going to build it up separately. And most new applications were moving over there. So I think what you're seeing here is that we've gotten to a not necessarily a tipping point. We still have most of our applications are either on VM or bare metal, but all the new development is going over there on, not all, most of the new development is going over there on Kubernetes. And definitely that is where all the AI applications are coming out of. So yes, the organizations are looking at this environment where unfortunately I have a bare metal, I have a VM environment, and now I have a Kubernetes environment. And I say unfortunately because they have to maintain those areas. Their maintenance. Tax maintainers. Anyway, go ahead, Robert.
Well,
Sorry.
no, I completely agree with you. It's, but if I was, look, if I was in their position, what would I do? Probably the same thing. Um, we look, predicting the future is it doesn't happen. Okay. It never works out. There's always one winner, who gets it right, but it's random happenstance. So it feels like they are saying, well, we don't know what's coming next. We do know that really broadly distributed apps are the way to go, whether it's, GPU workloads or servicing a customer or whatever it is. We're going to build this way going into the future. And so they don't know exactly where it is. So they're in a sense skating to where the puck is going, or at least spreading their bets around so that they can take advantage of any new technology that comes out, a new choice of how to build and run applications. But I do believe that Kubernetes is one, and I'm trying to be careful of not, drinking the Kool-Aid, the internal Kool-Aid of, with all my friends at CNCF. But, companies that build apps on Kubernetes, faster time to market, easier to maintain. Yes, Kubernetes is a pain. It is, but the alternative is a lot more painful.
So you're telling me I have a choice between the 12-inch stick in my eye and the 6-inch stick in my eye? Where are you going with that?
Pretty much. Hey, it's going to suck all around. So, the choice is minimizing suck and hopefully benefiting the people that are actually, look, companies don't make money off of how they run their applications. They make money off the applications, how quickly they're built, and how quickly they're updated to service their customers. Kubernetes is great at that. Container development has oh my God, it's just like when I first saw containers, like, where have you been all my life? Just dealing with having to do all these updates across servers, just so, there's an application that depended on this one library. And now I don't have to worry about it. It's all encapsulated in the container. But we needed a way to orchestrate all these containers. And here comes Kubernetes. Much like democracy, which sucks, but it's the best thing we got.
Not everybody might agree with that today, but we'll see. Camberly, last question on this whole subject. Is on-premises servers making a comeback? Is there something going on here? I mean, a year or two ago, it was cloud or bust, but are we kind of coming full circle on that as well?
Well, we've talked about this a couple of times. There's two factors in that. One is if you've got a stable application that's not changing that much, et cetera, it's more cost effective to have it on-prem. And we get back to talking about sweating your assets. And it's all about that. So yes, the CIOs are going through and examining what makes sense on-prem, what makes sense off-prem, but they're still staying in the cloud. That's not disappearing. The second piece of that is AI. And I'm not going to let my data escape from my four walls. And so therefore that has to stand up. And those are the new applications that are coming on board. So I'm going to train on-prem. Yes, we're seeing some of that training going up in the cloud, but there's a lot of concerns about doing that. So those acquisitions are going on-prem. Something else that I saw recently as well is the data protection being on-prem, which is another set of servers that you have there. That to me is kind of curious. I think that more has to do with the companies per se, as well as recoverability time. And if I'm doing my processing with more more servers on-prem, then of course I'm going to have the data protection on-prem in order to do fast recovery. So, that has a tiering, effect in terms of all the technology that you're purchasing. It's not just servers; it's all of the technology.
All right. Well, folks, you heard it here. Hey, servers, IT infrastructure, it's kind of like fashion. Eventually, those bell bottoms do come back and people start wearing them again. So there you go. Robert, Kimberly, thanks for sharing your insights today. As always, they were great. And, and thank you all for watching the latest episode of Techstrong Gang. Please stay tuned for the rest of the lineup for Techstrong.tv because it too will be equally awesome. We'll see you tomorrow.